pass it. Pass that to. Okay. Right, it's the last meeting, of course, of the committee. So, hello and goodbye, as it were. Somewhere I've got some glasses. Okay, so we'll get started. First thing, anybody, any apologies? It doesn't look like it. Everybody's here.
Yes, Councillor Pixie Wilcox.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that.
She's unwell.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I know it's Friday and everybody's eager to escape. Okay, we have the minutes from on page 5. Do I have any comments on the minutes? Oh, can I have a proposer to accept the minutes then? Thank you, Dave, and a seconder. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Right. Okay, progress on outcomes and sorry, I'll slow down a little bit so that we can look around and see that there's no public here. Is there any public questions? We haven't received any. Oh, apologies. Are there any declarations of interest for any of the matters that are before us today? No, there are no declarations of interest. Thank you for the reminder. And then we go on, as I say, as I've leapt ahead to progress on outcomes and recommendations from the previous meeting. I have them in front of me and I've got some comments to make. But I'll start with the committee as usual. Does anybody have anything to say? Let's start with the first one, which is the highways PFI contract. Any comments? Chris,
I've got one that applies to everything on here, and that's we don't want this to just sort of fall off a cliff at the end of this session. So I think we should make a recommendation that the chair and the scrutiny officer actually briefs whenever the new chair of the relevant committee is appointed, actually briefs them on all of the things that we have carried forward. So because there's a lot of things here that aren't finished.
I agree. Okay, I'm happy to if you're proposing that recommendation, I'm happy to support
I will
that.
propose that.
Is everybody else in agreement? Yes, good. Okay, I'm going to comment on ones as they come up, but I'm going to go around everybody else first of all. So on the regeneration strategy, we had a very helpful thank you to both of you meeting about Nicholson Road and Newport Harbour. I've made some fairly extensive notes, and I think that was extremely useful to understand the issues that the council faces, the priorities that we have, and in fact, fundamentally, nothing like that can actually go ahead without the funding that is necessary to basically take some of the first steps. And it was useful to know that they were still there. And it's again something which the committee system will take up as they see fit. You've given us an update on Camp Hill. Does anybody have any comments on the update from Camp Hill?
Just a question. We've got an obligation on roads that we don't actually own. And someone just give us an explanation of that. An obligation for maintaining roads, but they're still part of the prison estate. Sure why?
That was part of wasn't that part of the agreement for the funding that came?
I assume it's part of some agreement, but I'm not sure what what the agreement was that it's part of.
I mean, that was
What's
back
that?
in, that was Wayne Whittle, wasn't it?
I was-
That one,
Yeah,
yeah, the-
can I just throw something?
Yeah, Councillor Ward, please.
The roads around the prison estate have various owners.
Yeah.
And you can't just go say, oh, the Island Roads are going to do this or that, because some of the residents own the roads. So it's a complicated issue. That's it. That's what I can-
Yeah, I've actually, obviously, I've spoken to Councillor Garrett about it, and and we've been round there and we've talked about the various different types of ownership. I think given the way that it was actually conducted, we've taken on responsibility from the prison estate where appropriate. And that's one of the reasons why it's so complex about how they are actually maintained. I mean, if I go to the actual statement, when you actually read through it, it took me a couple of reads to actually understand what was going on. I suppose the only thing that I would add is that's very helpful, but it would also be helpful to know whether there is a timetable for that to occur.
Yeah, I think this has actually passed over to highways now. I think the original work was done by Paul Thomas back when I think Councillor Whittle signed it in 2020, I
Yeah,
think.
quite a long time ago.
Yeah, and then Regen were moving with them, and they had the reorganisation of the directorates. I believe that's all now with highways, because I think all the work was sort of done to get to a certain point, wasn't it? And now
Yeah.
it's actually getting the physical work done now.
Yeah, no, it says, I mean, specifically mentions highways as the team internally who are taking that forward. So obviously they're taking that forward in conjunction with Island Roads or another contractor as the case.
Essentially, I think that £650,000 was there enabled to get the roads up to spec, and then they would go to the network, as I
Okay.
understand it.
So the answer at the moment, as far as we know, is that we don't actually have a timetable as to when that will.
Well, the actual response is you need to speak to leave the council or when the director's back, because that's not with Regeneration.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure we can get that if that's a written,
Can I
response.
suggest that
like-
we have a recommendation that we request a timetable for the work being done on Camp Hill, around Camp Hill.
It's no good coming to us because we won't be here.
No, what I mean is we can.
So there is that it is looked at, and that it's briefed to the appropriate chair of the new committee system.
Okay, I think that we can agree. Is everybody happy with that? Yes, we'll do that then. Okay, thank you very much for that. That's helpful. And then we have the skills board, which we have a very short update, which is basically we're not doing very much at the moment. There's an internal group that meets on a regular basis, and we're awaiting guidance on how skills is going to be progressed across the region. Again, I've got comments to make on that, but does anybody else have any comments on that as we speak? Can I go around? Ian, do you have anything? Dave?
No, not on that item, but can I jump back to the PFI
Please do.
section? It just relates to the paragraph right at the bottom. When new councillors are elected, Island Roads are happy to take part in induction processes. Now, I know this committee will cease to exist come May, but can we or you, Chair of this existing committee, put forward a recommendation to the chair of the relevant committee that induction sessions go ahead? Because as a councillor, I think that's really, really important. And that's, if there's a new councillor, I think that's a really good way of introducing PFI contracts and what Island Roads do to new councillors. And I mean, and for existing councillors as well, it could be a good refresh.
Okay. Yes, I think that's sensible. Does it? Yep. So it's seconded. That's a recommendation. That's seconded by Councillor Quirk. Everybody else in favour? Yes, we're all in favour of that. So yes, if we could do that.
Yeah, there was just one other thing. It may be me, it's probably me being thick, but can I just have some clarity on, I'll just read this out. And it relates to the PFI scoring on the road's conditions. And it says the average of these scores forms the fundamental basis of compliance with the PFI spec. Therefore, island roads must concentrate on achieving these average scores and must be given the authority to manage these at their risk. Otherwise, performance becomes a risk of others, and island roads cannot be expected to take responsibility. Am I right in saying that they are referring to the Isle of Wight Council? Just to me, that just sounds a tad ambiguous. Just some clarity for the future. That'd be.
You might need to take that away, councillor, because there's nobody here from Highways to answer that. My assumption is that is correct.
That was, I read it like that, but maybe worth checking.
Okay, I'm going to be fairly straight on that. I read through these responses, and my bottom line is the first one says we're doing everything that we should and we're not going to change. So in terms of our recommendation that they could improve signage and remove signage for road closures and diversions, they have basically kicked back and gone, we don't need to change. And we wouldn't be raising it, and our residents wouldn't be raising it unless it needed to be changed. So I am going to suggest that we recommend that highways go back to the island roads and suggest that they may like to reconsider this matter and see how they can improve their approach. Because all of us can give examples where roads are closed. Sorry, it looks like I'm doing the headmaster thing with my glasses on my nose. It looks like the roads are often closed statutorily, and then they stop the works for the weekend, say, and they're still left closed. There is no effort by that's unfair. There is limited effort by island roads to ensure that roads are open, and there is no recognition here that a diversion, and especially in rural areas, substantial miles of diversion has an effect on road traffic accidents in its own right. So I am concerned that they are not taking this as seriously as they might. So as I said, my recommendation is that we ask highways to take this recommendation back to island roads and to consider with them how they might actually deliver something that will improve the situation for our residents. You've given the committee, Councillor Quirk has given the committee good examples from the Shanklin area, and we're all aware of episodes all over the islands where this has been a problem. On top of this, and it's actually been raised in Parliament, strangely enough, and it was mentioned by Island Roads, so it's quite fair, that utilities are increasingly using emergency statements to do works that are not emergencies. The government minister read out a reply from a civil servant, and I was thinking that was quite well written. It was basically a complete kickback. We don't have to do anything. It's not true. There are statistics to show the amount of increase of the use of emergency powers that are statistically totally impossible to be justified by saying that it's just an increase in emergencies. It is actually clearly a misuse of those powers. So I would like to suggest that, again, highways talk to Island Roads, and that Island Roads provide us with the information, provide the council with the information that they can push forward to central government or to by the MPs.
Nick, could I just raise a point there? I think with these things with the emergency powers, with respect to Island Roads, if you get something like a water main or a gas pipe, it's like I've sort of worked with all my life, it's at what stage do you, like for instance, I sometimes walk down the road, I've actually reported a few gas leaks because I smell gas outside people's houses, and I think like, oh, and it's not flue gas, it's gas from the main. If until they investigate that, how do we know that it's not an emergency? That's my concern. And the other thing, when you get these things like these sinkholes, we've had a glut of sinkholes in Maidstone where I used to live in Kent. And a lot of them are caused by water leaks, just washing away the subsurface. So I think we need to tread a little bit careful on that, because there could be knock-on effects if it's left. And I think there could be safety issues as well, particularly with the gas.
Yep, you're quite right, and I take your point entirely. I think the problem is that what we're seeing is a massive increase in the use of those emergency powers, which is not supported by the massive increase in emergency. I mean, if they are using it as a mechanism to carry out normal works, which they just haven't scheduled properly, and they want to fit in, then that is not an appropriate use of those powers. And that is all I think we would say to that. But you're quite right. I mean, you know, an emergency does happen. We are only too aware that sometimes scheduled works that urgent works are delayed, as into Ventnor, because that road is so critical to traffic movement.
I think the case in point was the recent works at Eddington Road. I think it was only meant to be scheduled to be closed for a week. But obviously when they exposed the gas main, it was quite major. It was shut for 2 or 3 weeks. Obviously something more severe was going on. But just a point.
Okay, so can I ask for a seconder for that particular proposal on the use of emergency powers by utilities? Thank you, Councillor Beston. And can I ask the committee whether they agree with that generally? Yes, we have unanimous agreement on that. Okay, thank you. Where else? Oh yes, and on the Skills Council, my thoughts were very much that skills are absolutely critical to what the economic development of the island generally. We all know that, that's not an issue. We talked about the skills board, and obviously we've got this case that it's been delayed, not delayed, that we're awaiting sort of strategic direction. Given that strategic direction is now likely to be coming from a mayor who won't be elected until next year, and won't be able to do anything for 4, 5, 6 months at least, would it be appropriate? And this is for the committee to discuss, and obviously for the administration to consider. Would it be appropriate for us to try and take something forward before that? Simply in terms of whether it would be worth forming a skills board on the island, people who deliver skills training, who need skills training, who might need skills training, you know, consumers and suppliers. Councillor Jones-Evans, please.
Yeah, as I reported at the last meeting, we have got skills board on the agenda for Economic Development Board, and on the next meeting, which is 1st of April, so it's only in like 3 weeks' time. And the chair of the skills board was, which hasn't been disbanded, just there was a capacity issue, resource issue, is a member of the Economic Development Board. So we'll be discussing how to move forward. There is obviously work being done. I mean, you're sort of keyed into it. What's happening? So with Portsmouth, Southampton skills, really is happening there as well. We've got the draft of the plan, that strategic plan, haven't we, as well? Economic strategic plan for the island. So there's lots of moving parts, but absolutely we can't have a whole year with nothing happening. That's not but stuff is happening. So if you want to just give an update on that, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, there is some stuff going on in the background. Hampshire are taking quite a strong lead already with skills. We have got a very, as you'd expect, a very, very limited resource internally to deliver skills. There's only so much we're able to do with the current resource. I think the hope for us is that we become part of something bigger under devolution and get better resourced. But at the minute, the internal group that we've got just consists of myself, Lee Matthews, one of the economic developments, and some of the skills providers. So there are discussions going on internally to try and take things forward. But then the next discussion is at Economic Development Board about what we do long term. It is very difficult to make a decision about what is best to do long term at the minute, because you haven't got all the moving parts. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
The one thing So the one thing that is coming out, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I can do now. One of the strongest themes that's coming out of the consultation around the growth and prosperity strategy for the Isle of Wight is skills. I'd probably say that actually more than anything else, that one is distilling itself right to the top. It's very much about young people and keeping people on the island and providing the right skills. So it is, as you said, Chair, extremely important. But if we do think it's extremely important, we're going to need to resource it properly.
This is why it's perfect timing in a way that we've got this, you know, this hot off the press consultations, and it's all fresh. It's got the what's it, LSIP? LSIP sitting in the background as well. So got plenty of data. But because it is one of the core competencies on the devolution framework, it's really helpful that this timing is now, because it can go straight in there as evidence and help us build forward with that. And you know, to be fair, some of the things that we're talking about aren't that different from the facing and thoughts of the Southampton either. So we do have that economy of scale for delivering some headline stuff, but it's getting underneath our particular things, like probably like hospitality is an area we probably an area that we sort of major on more than the other ones.
Sorry, I talk too much. Can I ask any of the other councillors if they want to comment at all on the skills side of that?
We might not have a budget to do it ourselves, but we need to be facilitating and encouraging. And as Julie said, we need to be looking at where the areas, so that if the money becomes available through a mayor or any devolution or whatever, if there is money available to sort of push into it, we know what we want to be doing. And actually having our strategic direction defined doesn't cost too much. It's actually implementing it that costs the money.
I mean, there's stuff goes on.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about it.
Yeah, you say what's stuff that does happen.
There is, I think, Councillor Perkins is spot on in suggesting that there are some things that are going on in terms of funding streams that are available at the minute and work that's underway. So there's the new Connect to Work scheme, which has just been launched by the Department of Work and Pensions, which is a considerable sum of money. And there was a report taken to CMT recently on that. But Lee Matthews and his team in economic development are going to procure that in exactly the way that you mentioned, Councillor Quirk. And there is some limited work around the Youth Hub, which is a project that we're kind of trailblazing.
Yeah, we are very much so.
But
yeah.
both of those projects are trying to get people in particular groups into paid work. So it's trying to move people from the unemployed into paid work by, in a sense, providing them with the skills and the training and the guidance to take them from A to B. There's quite a lot of focus around the hard to reach groups, I suppose, in terms of people trying to get employment. But more of that work needs to be done. And we, unlike to some extent Portsmouth and Southampton, which have got huge teams of people that are looking into skills, Councillor Quirk says we aren't in that position, but we need to draw that funding down and procure those individuals to undertake that work on our behalf.
I think we've probably all got thoughts about skills, and I think we can probably save those to the committee system. I think that may be one of the advantages that we have there, is that we'll be accumulating everybody's knowledge and trying to get it going as best we can. Okay, well, shall we? We'll call a halt to that particular item. I don't think we've got anything particular, a recommendation to do on that. Thank you for giving us a background to that. It's really helpful. Right.
Is there a particular area that you think, or you've got knowledge of, that we need to be focusing on, particular sector where you feel there's a particular need? Then do let us know. You've got intimate knowledge of what the skills should be.
Not for this committee, it's a different committee should be looking at it. But certainly when I was chair of governors of the Bay Academy, you lost a year of the kids coming in because the 5 or 6 feeder schools all use different methods of doing maths and English, and it took you a year to get them all on the same page. And so the reason for the slump when you go into secondary schools in performance is because you actually haven't got a policy that's consistent across all of your schools. And one of the fundamentals is maths and English. And the way it was set up, and I don't know what's happened in the last 8 years, but the way it was set up, it was set up to fail. And that's something that I did put in the education survey that was done sort of as on school places and sort of as a comment, but there were a lot of comments and it's probably hidden there, but that is an area that we need to look at because it's the basic skill, real requirement, and that should actually be delivered at school. And the fact that we've got nearly 800 children not being educated in school and some of them not being educated at all is part of the skills problem.
Having worked in schools and having still have contacts in them, there's a big discussion about how schools can actually, what schools can do about it. I mean, because obviously they have major resource issues as well. But I mean, again, I mean, it will, and we'll come on to it when we get onto the economic development board, and the economic strategy is very much sort of, you know, if we all know that skills are the critical issue, then, as you say, we need to raise that up the agenda and basically be focused on where that is. And yes, I mean, I'm sure that I've got some limited knowledge, and looking around the councillors on the committee here, and also the point in the councillors in the council chamber, we do have quite a range of backgrounds and knowledges on the skills needed. You know, we've got everybody says that tourism is the biggest industry. Well, obviously, because it's less than a third, it's not. It's certainly not the most highly paid one.
36%.
Yeah.
That, isn't it? I did get my maths O level chair.
Then I accept entirely. I'm quite willing to be told I'm incorrect at any time. Quite used to it at home. But nonetheless, one of the issues is how do we get the high skilled jobs, and how do we get our local people into those high skilled jobs? And they're not just academic jobs, they are technical jobs as well. And the technical jobs which we look at are one of the major issues on the island. Trying to get the right people, trying to make sure that the people get onto the pathways to higher levels of, key stage 4 and key stage 5. You don't necessarily need the people who are the sort of academics. And speaking of sort of somebody who was reasonably academic, I can say we don't want lots of people like me. Okay, can we move on? We'll move on from that, and we'll go on to our first item, which is flood risk management. I think that is. Shall we start? Is there any sort of starting comments that you wish to make, Councillor Fuller?
Absolutely not. I think what I will I'm quite happy to sort of like press where we're coming from at the moment. There's been quite a lot of work within flooding in the last 12 months, and I think one of the key issues that we've been looking at is the Section 19 reports that have been coming through that have been looked at. And one of the things that you may have noticed from the report was the requirement to get flood plans out for all the local areas that are prone to being flooding. And there's been a lot of work, particularly with James, Tash, and I would say the team. It isn't a huge team, but with what bodies we've got available going out and supporting. And I think one of the other things that is key, and you will probably get this from the paper, the importance of partnership working. It's not just the local flood authority, it's the Environment Agency, it's landowners, it's local residents groups, it's Southern Water as well, where we are all trying to work together to try to address some of the issues. And just because you have flooding in one area doesn't mean that you have the same issues next door in another flood area. But you know, this is bread and butter stuff for James, and and Tash. Just it's just a bit frustrating because James has been doing a fantastic job all week with the IPS, and it's good to have the two of them here this evening.
Well, I mean, as always, I appreciate the attendance of officers and the expertise that they bring. Right, what I would like to do then is go round. I know that councillors have particular points to make. I've got a couple, but I will wait till the end, obviously. Can we start again with Councillor Ward? Is there any questions or queries that you have on the flood management strategy in front of us?
Not what I read in the paper. And I think that's pretty straightforward. And what I'd like to say, actually, the issues around Morton Brook and the upper reaches of the River Yar are a different issue. Is being addressed by the Environment Agency. And I was quite interested to read that the people looking after Brading Marshes quite categorically said that the flooding, Morton Brook, etc., was nothing to do with the sluice bridges and so on and so forth. So I think that's fine. I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Excellent. It's always good news. Councillor Ward, sorry, going to bring you in again. Councillor Adams, I apologise.
Minor issue. Concerns planning as well because of the procedure. The new houses at Eddington Road, James, opposite Cores Avenue, was the site of the old Longhouse. We get persistent problems there with the drain in the road. We consistently get raw sewage coming up there. The developer there, you know what, last year had quite a serious flood. The three new houses were flooded, water coming down the driveway, entranceway into it. Flooded the houses. There's just a deluge of water comes down it. He's made an illegal connection to a drain up there, which I'm sure you're aware the comments coming. Now, it transpires that he's not complied with the planning regulations on the asphalt they put down in the bits and pieces. And I'm just raising this point because I'm concerned that someone could buy them houses not being aware of what's gone on there because they've already flooded. And I bet that's not mentioned on any sales report anywhere. But with regards to enforcement, James, he's made this illegal connection to the drain. Nothing seems to have been done. Are we going to stop this sort of thing happening in the future? And are we going to force what we're trying to do with the SUDS program? And because from what I can make out from the application, they was meant to put in some sort of surface drainage in there, permeable drainage. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah, so that
Sorry,
shares.
yes, please.
Yeah, so just in that particular case, and I guess it was out a couple of principles. So in that particular one, there was a drainage strategy, if you like, which was signed off at a planning stage. That drainage strategy hasn't been implemented by the developer, both in terms of the materials, as Councillor Adams quite correctly stated at the top of the site, and also where the connection has been made to the surface water. So there's a couple of issues there. One, which is the materials, which is a current enforcement case with us, and secondly, from Southern Water's perspective, a connection which shouldn't have been made into their system. So obviously, and they will take up that separately as a separate regulatory process. So it's unfortunate. Obviously, the developer's not done what they should have done, but both of those things are being addressed through the two different regulatory processes. And I think in some ways it's quite a good example of the challenge we have, because development can sometimes provide betterment from a flooding perspective, because it can put water in the right place and send it to the right place and look after it better. But it's only if it's done in terms of the accordance with what's been approved, and this is the situation there. So it's quite I won't say neat example because it's not a good example, but you know what I mean in terms of some of the challenges we face. But both those regulatory processes will pick up that issue.
Southern Water have also recently increased their regulations around connections in new property, so that will increase their ability to activities in the future.
But we can't change the legislation back, so they are a statutory consultee.
It is, I say, Southern Water made quite a significant change very recently, in that they are now refusing any connections of surface water into the combined sewer system. Full stop. So it's not even a conversation. So that is a significant change for the development sector. It's something obviously we've got in our SUDS SPD, we've got in the IBS already, so we've kind of future proofed it a little bit, but it's a big step change from Southern Water. It's not just on the island, it's in other areas they look after as well. So it's a positive step, because as we've heard quite a lot, The foul system and combined system is sufficient to take all of the foul water on the island. The issue is all the surface water that goes into it. So starting to refuse future connections is a really big and positive step, I think.
So,
Right, so, sorry, can I, yeah, I was going to come on to you, Councillor Preston, please.
so on that, James, so am I right in thinking that any new development, any new planning application must have a SUDS plan to go with that? So as you say, there's no conversation to be had. Every plan must come with a sustainable drainage system plan to go with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is, and obviously there will be occasions, certainly in certain parts of the island, when we're thinking down to the south, where putting water in the ground is not what we want to do. And so again, that's reflected in the SUDS SPD as well. But yeah, the fundamental principle is that all developments got to deal with its surface water in a different way to just putting it into the sewer. They can't do that. So there will obviously be the odd circumstance where it has to happen because there is literally nowhere else for it to go. But the starting point is separation, doesn't go into the sewer, which is a real positive step.
I think one of the more profound issues that we have with the Isle of Wight is a lot of the water that doesn't get taken away seeps into our infrastructure, and it puts us as much greater risk from coastal erosion, from landslips, and I think certainly on the southern shore of the island, residents are aware of that, and I think we have to be perhaps much more proactive than perhaps other local flood authorities across the south of England. So I would like to think that we're sort of like one step ahead of the game with that.
That sounds very positive. Sorry, Councillor Weston, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Adams.
I'll just come in with something.
Please do. Sorry.
I'm out of touch with the planning, James. Could in the old days we used to have,
Miss you.
because of working with that on that. In the old days, we used to have a building inspector come out, and when we finalised the drain inspections, he checked all that and passed all that. Has all that gone now? Do we not inspect that? Is there not a site visit on completion that someone comes out and actually inspects these connections and ticks the box and says, like, yeah, that's okay? Because it seems to me, if that was the case, if we had the old style building inspector come out, we could alleviate some of these problems that are going on, because these drainage connections really need to be checked.
Yeah, obviously there are still building inspectors and building regulations, but unfortunately sometimes this doesn't get picked up by building regs, because if someone's effectively laying the driveway at the front, that's nothing to do with building regs, that's just the design and development. So yeah, obviously where it would get picked up by building regs, that still occurs. It doesn't always fall under that regulatory body, unfortunately.
Yes, so the biggest thing for me reading the Section 19 report is the phrase obstructions and blockages. Okay, probably know where I'm going to go with this. And the reason because I can relate to it now because of what happened in Collingwood Road, etc. So, but that's actually given me a better understanding, if you like. So it could be the blocking and the obstructions were part of the flooding event, so they've washed down, etc. But it could have been that the debris was already there waiting to be washed into gullies, culverts, trash gate, etc. Now, it's not just the responsibility of the Isle of Wight Council, it's not just the responsibility of Isle of Wight, it comes under the environmental agency, etc. Southern Water. So I just wanted to get a feeling of how all bodies can work together to alleviate, and it could be the most simplest of things, couldn't it? It could be a build up of leaves, twigs, logs, etc. But a very small thing can really cause a large or significant flooding event. So I just want to know from yourselves how we can all work together to alleviate that. And secondly, the other big word that comes up is maintenance or lack of. And what, not just council, but all of us together, what we can all, and I know there is a maintenance plan, etc. So there's two things there, and how is the maintenance plan being developed, and how is that being going forward? See what I mean?
Michael?
Please.
Certainly. So since the major flooding events that we had in 2023, we have taken a step back and looked at that position of how the risk management authorities work together and ensure that all the risk management authorities that have any responsibility that builds into particularly flood incidents, and as you've mentioned, the blockages, maintenance issues that exist. Previously, although we would correspond, we've not had regular meetings together. So we have collaboratively put together the risk management framework that you've seen inside the report pack. And with that, we also now have the regional managers and directors for Southern Water, Environment Agency, Southern Wight Council, LLFA members, and will be, as that forms, also starting to invite in our local flood chairs from the different flood groups on the island, so that on a quarterly basis we have in front of us what we now have, which is a very large spreadsheet that has every recommendation in it for every area and who that is designated to, so that we can go through that in detail in terms of the Section 19s to make sure that every part of that risk management authority framework is updating what they are doing. And then also as part of that programme, we are looking at ensuring that everyone understands their maintenance obligations within there and are maintaining any issues that are raised towards us. The third part of that is also the major part of infrastructure that is owned by private landowners. And that's from field systems through to private properties. And they are managed in a number of ways. As a local authority, we have a very small resource in our surface drainage and flood officer, and the permanent post that's still advertised for a land drainage officer, which we are hoping someone will apply for sometime soon. And within those resources, they will act reactively to reports of any issues that need to be reacted to. And we've seen that in particular, the new surface water and flood officer has done some sterling work across the island. Great praise from many elected members and parts of the island that he's worked in, both Gunville and Wootton. So we are increasing that, as well as then we're going to start looking at increasing the amount of communication we do in flood preparedness to ensure that we help everybody who is a landowner of any type understand their responsibilities to keep blockages and obstructions clear from the part where water courses pass through their land. And we also, as we particularly have noted in Shanklin with the Collingwood Road incident, as we follow Brook Path stream all the way back up to Origin, there is a lot of work we need to do with local communities about what goes over the back fence and into the stream. Because that then blocks up the trash gates, it blocks up the culverts, and it causes those situations where, as you know, it led to in Shanklin a significant blockage that led up to backup of flooding within properties, even to the point that when we were having normal rain, it was causing significant issues. And I'm glad we have now got to the resolution.
But just a kind of supplementary,
Just to keep it as the population, because they just said one of those.
kind of goes on to what have been my second question to riparian landowners and riparian landowners' responsibilities, etc. I mean, and it's good to hear. So, you know, there's difference between reactive and proactive.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the greatest respect, I think probably, you know, we have probably been reactive.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to hear that we started on that proactive stage as well. And you've kind of answered my question, which would have been what is the Isle of Wight Council doing now to engage with landowners to ensure that they're fulfilling the riparian responsibilities, etc. So that's great, you've answered. Thank you.
Thank you. I think James would like to say something on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tash, and through your Chair. I think you make a really good point about that reactive and proactive approach. And fundamentally, it comes down to resources. But I think what we're seeing with our current officer in post, and whilst there's only one of him, he has got the connections and the technical expertise to get people to do stuff they should be doing. So and I think he's got a long list of stuff that he's looking at, but as that starts to clear, he'll be able to perhaps move from some of that more reactive work to some of that proactive work and doing that, which is real positive for us as well. So absolutely, and by pairing is fundamental, and making people understand what they've got to do as well. And I think, you know, Councillor Ward raised the example of kind of Braiding Marshes, and when you look at the back of Nicholas Close, some of the work that's going on back there around with National Rail over clearing their old culverts and getting them CCTV surveyed to get them cleared out, and then speaking to our Environment Agency about potentially kind of desilting the river there, because that's one of the big issues around the water not being able to get into the marshes in the first place, because it's the river's so silted up, and it's just making those connections, having those conversations, which we're really starting to do in a more proactive way now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lever, you've got a little bit of a flooding problem in your area.
Yeah. Firstly, I think before I get into my questions, if it's okay, Chair, I would just like to recognise the work that Tash and James and now Sam have been doing on this. I think it's been a difficult 2 years. Not having Sam in post has made things really tricky to get things done. But now that Sam is there, the response I'm getting from residents that are aware of the work he's been doing is positive now. That I think the best thing is they're seeing what came out of the S19 reports, and now they're seeing that plan take shape a little bit. So I think it's just helping lift spirits a little bit that things are going in the right direction. So yeah, I just want to say thank the team for that. Firstly, hearing about the working group, the flood risk management working group, that's really good to hear about that proactivity that Councillor Veston was mentioning. I think you kind of touched on it there, Tash, but just to understand a bit better, is it more about sharing progress and updates, or are there conversations around perhaps working together on aspects that not necessarily come out of Section 19 reports, but perhaps that more proactive work that has been identified in other areas? Is that kind of thing happening in that forum as well? Or
so that forum is set up with a number of objectives. The primary objective is collaborative risk management, to make sure that everyone is discussing it together. Of those objectives is also to seek new projects, to seek collaboration, to seek what project work each of those risk management authorities are doing, and where we can better support each other in ensuring that those projects are brought to fruition quickly and promptly to benefit the community with maximum value. We're also using that forum to seek further investment opportunities where projects that may one or the other organisation not be able to follow through on its own. If we do a collaborative approach, such as we have done with the SUDS MOU that we have with Southern Water, we can pool resources to accelerate the speed of delivery of projects that make to our community. And then there is also the tracking of the reactive recommendations. That is just a part of the meeting. We also want to be proactive in identifying those new projects, better collaborations, and having a collective approach to ensuring that all parties remain aware and keep it on their agenda permanently, that we have to do what we can for community value into this.
Thank you. One more, bear with me this. So this is more about the flood investigations themselves. So the Newport one specifically, which included Carisbrooke and Gunville, I think it took, if I remember correctly, around 12 months to deliver, which that's not attributing blame to the team, by the way. That much of that time was taken through delays from the consultancy group that we were using. However, given that reality, 12 months feels like perhaps too late to ascertain the learnings needed to take forward before the next year's wet weather comes around. So I guess my first question is, how do we, have we looked into how we might streamline that process to get those vital recommendations sooner, so that affected residents have some confidence in the machine's just starting anyway, so that residents have some confidence in the plan going forward. So how do we streamline that process? And the second thing I was reflecting upon my own input and residents' input into the process was around, in hindsight, because I'd never experienced this before, and some of the residents had never experienced this before. It's about understanding the process and how to input the times we needed to input and the best way to do that. There was obviously conversation going on at those times, but I don't know if going forward in terms of learnings, it's beneficial for councillors to have, and I don't want this to just be on officers because they appreciate the time constraints everybody's under, but perhaps a recommendation going forward for the new committee that would oversee this is to work with officers in some sort of working group capacity, I don't know, to create some sort of training material for councillors specifically geared up to responding to S19 investigations and when and how to engage with residents to get the best input from them as well. Yeah, it's just a thought, but
Thank you, Joe. And you're right, it was a very, very difficult period
Yeah.
of time. In those October, November 2023 floods, there were, from the evidence gathering exercises that were undertaken, 317 properties experiencing internal flooding across the island. And that does not include the number of those who had external flooding to sheds, gardens, roads, driveways. Those were significant events. They were significant national events that were recognised by central government as being extraordinary, not normal flood conditions. Which did mean that with the, as you know, very small number of people who are the LLFA at the time, I think that was James and I.
Yep.
That leaves us not only dealing with supporting recovery of all of the communities, because it's not one community. So we're supporting the recovery of those communities and helping people get back to get the flood grants in place, ensure that people could get £100 grants for their immediate issues, set up the process for the PFR grants, set up contracts with JBA for the flood investigations, and deal with 2 major landslides that also occurred directly afterwards. It was an incredibly pressured point for the local authority. And we do understand that the original contracts we set up, we wanted those back by the April. We had anticipated that, but it took a long time to get all the evidence back in, which we did through the flood grant processing and through the advertised in press, social media, everything, route that people could supply their evidence. Those JBAR consultants did take longer than anticipated to get through the volume, and it was a huge volume. And we have to remember those consultants are not just our consultants. They're being used across the country for flooding. At the same time, the James is also preparing the IPS, which is not an insignificant document. So I appreciate the time taken. We know the first draft with the Gunville team around the flood group around August. It was not as soon as we would have liked it to have been. We did have several meetings with the Gunville flood group and residents in the Methodist Church. We did take early drafts of the recommendations in early April to that group and asked for their comments and thoughts on it, but we received very little at the time. But we do continue, as you know, to have bi-monthly meetings with the Gunville flood group to keep that communication flowing. In the future.
And I was going to say, they weren't easy meetings, were they really? The thing is, when you get flooded out,
Yeah.
the amount of frustration that the residents have, things can't move quick enough. And
No.
I'd like to say a big thank you to Tash for.
No, and
what
it's
she-
one of the big pickups that we've had from with our emergency management team is that in these situations, when a flood occurs, we don't do response and then recovery. We nominate a recovery person from day one. Because while we're responding, and that response may take 3 or 4 days, recovery in the mind of a human, when you are outside of your house, starts the moment you're outside of your house. So we were looking in the future at changing that emergency management process so that recovery starts on the same day as response starts, to make sure that we are quickly doing what we need to do to support communities, to support individuals and support businesses in the event of flooding, which is one of the most traumatic things I think a lot of people can go through inside their homes.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to deal with the emotional and psychological shock of.
Sorry,
I was going to say just one point, I think, and reflecting on what Councillor Lever said as well, and I think when you look back and you try and learn from things that have happened.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, we commissioned 4/5 section 19 at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, I think in future, we'd probably look to spread that load rather than perhaps using one. Whilst they're really good, JB, and they do good work, I think as much as we were kind of like, there's so much, we kind of then gave them so much as well. So I think we may consider, if we had a similar, let's hope we don't, but if we did have a similar situation where we're looking at multiple section 19s, I think we'd probably look at getting a number of consultants in to do that work, because it then helps the response times, because, you know, we're chasing them from one, then another, and then another, and it was say a challenging period. But I think that's what I'd take away as a learning from that.
Councillor Adams.
I'd also like to thank you for the work you're doing on this, because some of the best times I've had as a councillor has actually been thank yous from residents, where I had simple things like ditches cleared and it's prevented their house from flooding. I think this is really important what you're doing. I have a concern about this with the cross agencies. I noticed that section 9.5, it says, however, the lead local flood authority, us, does not have the power to enforce these recommendations, nor do the recommendation indicate any funding will be available for the activities. Now, I realise everything ultimately comes down to funding, but getting back to Michael's point earlier, I thought also it was very important. We mentioned proactive and reactive. And there was a word thrown in there, Michael put in there, maintenance. It's, again, just, don't want to bore you to tears, but working with drainage for me, like James, I used to do some drainage maintenance in office blocks in London where they had problems. We knew where the problems were, so we kept on top of them. And the only way we could keep on top of them was we kept them clean. That was far cheaper than cleaning up after. The point I'd like to make is when you're in these meetings and talking to these other parties, is there any way we could try and facilitate some sort of planned maintenance on where we know the problem areas are? Maybe some sort of cross-funding where everyone's chipping in a bit, and because that to me would be cheaper than being reactive, coming along after and cleaning up and just, you know.
Pick that up.
Yeah, happy to say that, and I think I'll use the Collingwood Road example as a good one on that, and obviously a really unfortunate event there. But I think what's been happening since that, and certainly recently, is certainly from a perspective of maintenance of the ditches upstream, is that Sam is now on to Island Roads and others over what's your maintenance schedule, when it's happening, send me photos that you've done it, and if not, I'll be coming off. So it's that keeping on top of it, which again is a resource issue, and we can't have to be wary about not promising too much, because there's one of them. But it's that's the principle, I think, which you're getting at, is making sure that what is the maintenance regime and making sure people are on top of it. Whoever is responsible for assets, it could be council, Island Roads, Southern Water, Environment Agency, or a private landowner.
Don't take that the wrong way. It's not a criticism
No.
of what you're doing. It's just concerning that, like, we're having all this input initially. If we have no teeth, I'll get concerned that, like, Southern Water, the discharges and the bits and pieces, yeah, they're reacting to it now. It would have been nice if they reacted earlier, wouldn't it, before they got all the bad public. Okay.
And that's the real benefit of having these agreements in place and terms of reference in place with them to attend regular quarterly meetings. So they have agreed they will attend, and they've agreed that at the highest level. We have the Director of Environment and Innovation, Southern Water, who comes to those meetings. We have the Regional Director for Coast and Flood Risk Management coming to meetings. So we've also brought that down to the local level to make sure that the asset managers on the island are at those meetings, so that we can make sure that we are dealing with the operational through to the strategic inside those meetings, and that everyone understands what's expected of them and what we can do for each other more proactively in the future.
Councillor Weston, please.
Just changing the tack slightly, or in old sandbags. Now, I know that's part of the Island Road remit. Is that correct? It's part, Island Roads are responsible for sandbag provision.
Within the Island Roads contract, there is a provision for them to supply the sandbags. There's not an obligation on the local authority to provide sandbags. That is something we've chosen to put within that contract.
Okay, that's great, and I do understand that, you know, every homeowner, every landowner has got a responsibility to protect their property from flooding. Totally get that. So we're kind of going over and above perhaps what we should do. But currently sandbag provision is available, if you like, to be picked up from Cowes, East Cowes and Ryde. Now, bearing in mind that the eastern part of the island has been identified as a flood risk, such as Brading, Elston, Eastern Yard, Bembridge, etc. In the event of a predicted flooding event, or even a one-off flooding event, could there be a consideration for an additional sandbag collection location on the eastern part of the island, rather than centrally to Ryde and East?
Oh,
You start, I'll finish. Yeah, we'll take turns.
It's just a question, because, you know, if someone is being flooded and they're in Brading, on the map, it's not a long way to go, is it? But when you're in that situation of a flood event, that, you know, that person to either collect sandbags, that's going to be a real big task for them. So I'm just wondering if we could look at that.
I think there's 2 points I'll start off with on that. One is the role of local flood action groups, which is really key on that. And Bembridge is quite a good example where they have set up their own local flood action group, and there is a sandbag kind of almost depot that they manage themselves. So and they've got a kind of almost a list of people who, if there is a flood event, they'll go and deliver those to the more vulnerable residents in the community. So and they manage that through their flood action group, and that's a really good example of how that kind of almost satellite kind of operation can work. And I think there's similar moves to do something similar in Gunville, I think, as well, and have and
Right.
Binsted as well.
Yeah.
There you go, that's it.
Mhm.
So
Right,
so
great to hear.
yeah, it's certainly something, and then our emergency management colleagues are really hot on that and making sure that flood action groups are playing a key role in that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that. Finally to Councillor Quirk, do you want to add
Yeah.
anything to this?
First of all, I think it's a very good strategic document. It's well written and it's pretty comprehensive. But it's not, the strategic document itself doesn't save flooding of properties. It's the tactical implementation of the things that it's sort of supporting. And that seems to break down when it's not clear who's going to pay for the work. And in Shanklin, that seemed to be a big issue with the flooding in the centre of Shanklin, because the blockage was at an area where the boundary between the council's responsibility, Island Road's responsibility, private ownership responsibility, and everyone thought that the other one should pay for it. And it took 2.5 years. And although there aren't too many properties in Shanklin that were flooded, they probably had the worst flooding experience of any properties on the island. Properties flooded 17 plus times to a depth of 7+ feet. That's pretty bad. And water washing away. I mean, I suspect there are sinkholes under one of those properties now. The property may end up having to be demolished because other homeowners, and the council were arguing about who spends the £50,000 to do it, which it would have been at the time. Because of that, the whole area silted up in the culvert underneath the co-op. Now, I have copies of the photographs taken by the cameras before that was silted up.
Mhm.
And it silted up because it was blocked. And it then cost the co-op £30,000 plus to have it unblocked. But it's not their fault. It was the fact that it wasn't cleared in the first place. And yeah, everyone's getting, people who are totally innocent parties are picking up enormous bills because of the inaction in terms of implementing. I think the lesson, I think we have learned a lesson there, but it is in actually dealing with things in a timely fashion. And you know, it's like the flooding in by the recreation ground, you know, the bollard things blocks going in at the right time and ensuring that the guys don't turn up after the flooding's happened.
Mhm.
And it's the implementation that's the bit that really impacts on residents. And it's that bit that needs, you know, that tactical bit that needs to be really well defined. The strategy is great, but if it doesn't work at a tactical level, then it doesn't help at all.
Thank you, Chris. I absolutely agree with you. That shouldn't have taken as long as it should in Shanklin. When it got to the people who could make a decision, we made a decision to spend the money to get the job done, which is what needed to happen. But you're quite right, the tactical needs to sit hand in hand with the strategic. And that's why going forward, we have said in these joint risk management meetings, we will have ops and strategy in the same room so that we are not having that disconnect. We're actually listening to the boots on the ground, what is the art of the possible, as well as talking about the strategic management of risk in terms of flood management. Because we can't be in a situation again where we have those significant impacts on an individual or a small number of properties occurring because our risk management authorities are not appropriately working again together. We hope that through a different approach that we've put together won't happen again. We'll be able to deal with it with everybody in the room.
It's the timely intervention.
It is the time, and I understand that particular incident in Shanklin went on far too long.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Quirk. I'll be very quick with mine. They're fairly straightforward. Flood action groups. One of the things that I've tried to do is encourage town and parish councils locally in West Wight that they need to consider putting together those. Some of them have, 2 out of 3 have, but they've not really taken that on board. Is there best practice on flood action groups that you can put around that we can perhaps forward to IWALC, who can then pass it on and we can raise it as an issue within them, basically so that you've done the work already and then we can propagate it out further?
Yes, we can take that as an action. So our emergency management team have a pack of information to support town and parish councils and community councils in setting up flood action groups. We are happy to present that to IWALC and go to the town and parish council through the process. There's also a really good website, the Flood Forum, that sets out how to do that as a group and has lots of templates in terms of reference and management strategies and how to set that up as a local group in a really sensible and proactive way.
Okay, that's really
More
helpful.
than happy.
No, that's helpful. Second thing is to recognise that, and you mentioned 317, I think, unless I misremember. Yeah, I'm fairly sure that doesn't include quite a number of places in West Wight. I mean, in my ward, and we have discussed this, I am now aware of something like 20 properties that had internal flooding. One of those properties is still dealing with the after effects of that locally. So it's worth recognising that actually other parts of the island also were hit quite hard. Brighton got quite a big hit because of a blocked drain in a small lane, and then it flooded into from the above the village into the village, and of course, you know, that then you end up with flooding into houses. So if we can sort of try and make sure that. And there's no necessity to do a Section 19 report. It's just can we make sure that those things are recognised and dealt with as part of the sort of whole flood risk management?
Absolutely. One of the big issues, I'm touching on that briefly, that we have discussed as a whole risk management agency group, all the authorities, is how we share data and how flooding is recorded. We have, the Environment Agency has the 24-hour flood line. In the incidents that we had in October and November 23, very few calls, I'm afraid I don't have the number right now, but nowhere near the number of properties flooded actually reported a flood to flood line. And some of that confusion comes from there being different phone number for each risk management authority. And some of that comes to people being more focused, as they genuinely should be in many instances, protecting themselves than taking the time to go find out how to call the Environment Agency to report. We need to work out the best way to communicate to our community what phone number you call when in the event of a flood, to make sure that we are getting the information that we can then support better in recovery from floods, so that we don't have, for example, parts of the West Wight unknown to us because we haven't gathered it in any of those channels.
It's worth mentioning, and I'm not sure whether this has come up, is that there is a deliberate non-reporting of flooding because property owners don't want a reference to flooding for their own property. And there have been quite a number of people who have taken that action. So if you want to get a true figure, we may need to consider whether there is just a simple reporting of local flooding, some way of actually making sure that we get the real information. Because if people don't tell us, I mean, I drive by somewhere, I see sodden carpets outside, I talk to the landowner, the owner, I know they've been flooded, but they're not going to report it. And of course, that will have effects on other people. That's the issue that I think it's sometimes might be worth picking up at some stage.
Thank you, Chair. And you're absolutely right. And I think that's something we saw quite a lot, certainly in some of the areas that we've talked about in terms of the properties just simply not, they didn't even apply for the flood grant. They didn't fill in the form, in terms of collecting flood evidence. They just dealt with it themselves for whatever reason that might be, I think. And again, I think something comes down to education information around what flood insurance products are out there as well, because there are specific kind of flood insurance companies who will look at that particularly. So again, it's education, so people are aware that actually reporting it can be a positive thing and not necessarily a negative thing. So that will form part of those ongoing conversations as well.
Sorry, that was my phone going off. If anybody wants to not look guilty, I have turned it off.
It's worth for the notes making a note publicly that there are some very good pieces of information online about Flood RE, which is the Environment Agency's insurance side process that's been set up to help people who have been flooded and to make sure that insurance can be available, but also to make sure that insurance goes into place for Build Back Better, which then allows those PFR schemes, which is property flood level resilience, to be applied for and put into homes to help prevent flooding in the future. So it's really important for people to have to know that they're actually reporting your property as being flooded does not mean that your insurance will not be renewed, and it does not mean that you cannot get insurance in the future. There are products and programs specifically set up in the market to ensure that people who have been flooded can get insurance in the future.
Right, well, I won't talk about that then. I was going to mention that because it was something which came up in central government many years ago, about insurance, and about the sort of the backstop of a government insurance approach. It's happened in other circumstances. Right, the only other thing I was going to mention is actually the flood mitigation efforts not seen on the island but elsewhere, certainly up in the north, is where you have flood mitigation on the landscape to delay water flows, slow water flows down, reforestation, improvements to water retention areas, and also, of course, not a replacement, sorry, where we go backwards to actually remove drainage so that specific areas will hold more water. Basically, it does slow down the peak flow, and the peak flow is always the issue. I don't know, are there similar things happening on the island?
There is, yeah, and if you're really interested, if you Google Eastern Yar restoration, there's a really good project that Hampshire and Wildlife Trust are doing, which is effectively using floodplain to floodplain. Who knew? And so breaking the Yar out of bank so that actually the floodplain is used rather than channeling the water down to Morton and having some of the issues you've got there. So I think that's already had some limited positive impact. They're about 60% of the way through the project. They're going back on site in the spring to finish off that work, and yeah, it's a really good example of that in terms of using land to hold water where it can and slow that flow in the watercourses down to some of those more vulnerable points of infrastructure.
Yeah, because there are points in West Wight where, and I'm West Wight in general, including all the way over to virtually Ventnor. But there are areas where you can see that there are potential opportunities to have that type of mitigation, which is why I always, when I talk about flood action groups, I always talk about prevention and mitigation. Okay, that was the only points that I wanted to make. Does anybody else have anything at this stage? Councillor Lever.
Sorry, just yeah, just to touch on a few things. I think it's really important that we are touching on, it's not just the RMAs that can do things here. For example, in Gunville, a number of landowners, the NFU are involved, Natural Enterprise are involved, looking at catchment sensitive farming. So I think it's good not to just obviously learn from what we're doing, but also understand that there are other partners at play that can help with some of this flood mitigation. I think it's also worthwhile that there's only so much that a council with our funds and resources can do with this kind of stuff. And there's a number of government failures that I see. For example, the grants, we touched on the grants, largely inaccessible to lots of people. I can't remember what the name of it was, but residents had to pay £500 up front. I don't know how many people you know that have just have £500 at risk because that doesn't secure the work and the funding coming back. So I don't know how many people you know with just £500 at risk on that. Especially after you've just been flooded, which was a government scheme that was left to the council to administer. There's zero funding attached to S19 recommendations, which Councillor Adams touched on. Also gaps in legislation. So the maximum fine for breaching the Land Drainage Act is what, James?
Tenner.
A tenner. £10. Yeah. Stuff like that. And therefore, sorry, I'm coming to two recommendations. One is that the new chair of the incoming committee liaises with the island MPs to lobby government on changes such as that, because it's important. If we want to be able to do things, we need that unlocking by government. And also that what I mentioned earlier, I just want to make sure it's recorded that the new committee considers the working group to work with officers to develop the S19 response training or some sort of material to help with that response going forward. If we can recommend those two things, that would be lovely.
Are you happy with that sort of wording for those two recommendations? Okay, can I have a seconder to those two recommendations? Yes, thank you, Councillor Ward. And are we all in favour? Who is in favour? We have a unanimous decision on that. Yes, we could put forward those two recommendations for consideration, presumably by the Cabinet, who will then pass it on to the new committee system. And just pass it straight on. Okay, we've dealt with flooding. I do apologise, Councillor Quirk.
A really quick one was something picked up as a lever. The NFU have been actually doing quite a lot in terms of farmers. But we've got downward slopes on here, ploughing across rather than down.
Yeah.
You slow the water flow quite dramatically, and they've been doing quite a lot of sort of positive stuff in officers know it, but not everyone knows that.
Could you have a word with the vineyard locally to Bryston then? They ploughed back straight up and they've ploughed into the actual down itself, the chalk down.
In all seriousness, and a real unfortunate example of that was Arison in 2022, I think, or 2023, where the fields were ploughed down towards the road and we saw the devastating impact that had. They now plough the other way, no issue.
The road still floods.
Yeah, simple solutions. Simple solutions can sometimes be very, very important. Okay, if we move, can we move on from flooding? Good. Sorry, Councillor Quirk, I do apologise. Okay, I believe that we're on to the next item. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. I would like to suggest that we take a 5-minute or 10-minute break as necessary, a comfort break for people, if that's okay. I know that you're eager and keen to get moving on your part. Are you happy to have a very brief break? It will be a brief break. Okay, if we could have a 5-minute break, gentlemen. And then we will come back and look at economic development. Gentlemen, ladies, everybody, we will restart the meeting. I do apologise for that brief break if nobody wanted it. We will move on to agenda item on economic development. I think we've already started this discussion. And the reason why it's here is because, notwithstanding the fact that it's still in preparation, I think we have to recognise that the effort of officers to actually bring something in front of us, even though it's partway through, I wanted something that we could push forward, because this has been a major issue which we have looked at both in terms of the tourism industry and separately the sort of manufacturing services industry as a committee. So this is a sort of final chance for us to push some of those issues. Before I start questions, is there, do we need an introduction to any of this, or are we all happy with what we've got in front of us?
Presentation to be.
There is a presentation. Is that the?
I can take you through that if.
I'm always happy to be informed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Alex Mint, please.
A very brief presentation, as the Chair said, just to talk about the journey that we're on. As the Chairman said, the economic development strategy, although more commonly known now as the growth and prosperity strategy, is in its draft form still. Just to give you a little bit about the history, back when the LEP was dissolved, the government requested that we produce a solent economic or growth and prosperity strategy, which was funded by the remaining proceeds that they had available from the LEP. At that time, we made a case for also asking, because we wanted our own island growth and prosperity strategy to feed into the solent one, as did Southampton. Portsmouth declined, but as did Southampton. So we were able to get some funding through the LEP to undertake that piece of work. We worked with Southampton and procured collectively a company called Stantec to do that work for us. And that started to take shape last September. I'm going to go through what the scope of the work that they've done, so you can see the journey that we're on and where they've got to in the process. The Chairman asked, well, originally this was due to be completed so that you could scrutinise it today, and it went to committee in March. It clearly got delayed by the announcement of devolution at Christmas, because in effect, a lot of it had to be rewritten because the emphasis had changed. And also the other thing that was coming out of it was that there were a lot of people on the island that wanted to contribute. So the consultation exercise that we originally put aside started to grow. And lots of people wanted to talk about this. And there's been quite a lot of work, and Stantec have been working very hard on commissioning various different groups to talk to make sure that we get this growth and prosperity strategy to be a good one. The strategy is a strategy that tries to set a vision, identify the priority projects and interventions to address the challenges and opportunities up until 2050. So it's quite long term. As I said before, it does feed into the Solent growth and prosperity strategy. So it's a key document that feeds into that. And if you can just look at the slide, that's the work that has been going on since September. And we are roughly down at priorities of action. We've tipped a little bit back into stakeholder engagement because we've wanted to talk to further groups. But we are down at the priorities for action, and we have our first draft of the strategy, which officers and Stantec are going through at the minute. Clearly, the intention is always to bring this back to a future cabinet, or probably more likely a future committee, so that there can be comments made by members, and members get the chance to have a draft of this document themselves to look through. I think just to give you a very, very broad scope of what's going on, that, and I won't read it out, is current draft vision statement that's come out of considerable consultation and debate. As you can imagine, each and every sector feels as though their sector is the most important. So it has been quite tricky to reflect everything that's going on the island to that statement. I think.
I think one of the, sorry,
Sorry.
very quickly, one of the most important things that came out of the discussions that we had at Economic Development Board, and it's picked up on one of your questions, was the inclusivity. That any statement or any strategy was inclusive. So that came up very strongly in that statement. Sorry.
That's right. I think this probably is the most, these key emerging themes are the themes that are coming out of the consultation. And I think what is interesting is that they are, I don't think there's any real surprises there in terms of the themes that are coming out as being important on the Isle of Wight. We are all still contributing to those. In fact, Tash was just commenting that she's still contributing a lot on the net zero section of that. So it isn't, you know, as we said before, we're not there yet. This is just the journey that we're on. I did say earlier that the grey box at the bottom there is coming out as a very significant issue, education and skills. There have been a lot of consultations with young people and the colleges and the skills providers and any kind of education deliverers. So I'm not surprised by that. I think there's been a lot of debate around the, and I'll say Ian's on the call, but there's been on the meeting, there has been a lot of debate around the report that Ian wrote, the 15 years report, which is looking at how important our young people are in making sure we don't end up with an aging community and that we have young people with the right skills and keep young people on the Isle of Wight. So I'm not surprised that that's coming out as a key aim. And some of those things are very headline things, particularly around things like transport. And that theme is obviously drifting through and is emphasised in the Solent economic strategy. And it is going to be a key theme of one of the asks for DEVO if that occurs. Just to give you, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we've had a number of vision workshops with 18 stakeholders in attendance on one. They're some of the groups that we've been talking to. They're by no means the only groups that we've been talking to. And this part of the process has taken a considerable amount of time, as you can imagine, because it is important that this strategy is not shaped by council officers. This strategy needs to be shaped by local business and the general public and key stakeholders. So they were the thematic groups where we had stakeholder engagement. You can see that they are quite largely focused around some of those key themes. So it's not surprising that some of those things are considered to be important. As I said, the one at the bottom was quite, and we had to go back and do some further consultation with young people because there were such strong views coming out of some of those groups, which I think is very encouraging, honest. I think that is almost it. Only really to say that some of these obviously timetables have changed. The hope was originally that we would be signing this off in January, bringing it to you to scrutinise today. That has changed somewhat now, and my expectation is probably we're going to be delivering the strategy in end of April, early May, by the time we get the comments back. So it's going to straddle that difficult period between cabinets and committees, but members will get a chance to see the full document.
I just want to finish off just saying that Economic Development Board has been a really, really important part of this process. In fact, we had in mid-end of January, they had a whole afternoon workshop on it with the came over from the mainland, didn't they, from the consultants at Stantec, and we had, you know, a very frank discussion with our sector leads in that room. So it has been robust and challenging, and it's safe to say that they've now got a real feel for the island, haven't they? I think it's a strong voice coming through for the island in the draft, but there's still quite a lot of work to do there just to make sure it is right for us, because you know don't do these every 5 minutes. They take time, they've got to be right. But you know Alex is correct. The focus had to slightly shift when we obviously got that the early Christmas the government. So yeah, it's going to be slightly delayed, but you know, if it's needed to go through our own scrutiny and be made policy before the committee system, then we can make that happen by just calling a necessary meeting to make that happen. We're not gonna delay it for unnecessarily, but you know how things go. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what you think about the themes and also the vision statement, I think.
I'll say, I will, sorry, just one more thing. Go ahead, I missed telling you, which I think you probably also want to hear. Stantec are a national consultancy firm doing these kind of things all around the country. One of the things that they said to us afterwards, and it's always interesting to know how things differ in terms of different parts of the country. They were really surprised about the level of engagement from the Isle of Wight. It's no surprise to me. And they were also surprised by the passion and drive of people on the Isle of Wight and how much they wanted to contribute to this.
And how
They
much
said they don't normally get that in a lot of communities. So I think that's another plus for the island. People are engaging, we are getting their views, and hopefully it'll be them that shape this strategy.
And I think the Federation of Small Businesses said that as well, didn't
Mm.
they? They found the Isle of Wight response was way above that they see nationally. They're very impressed with our commitment to making the island a better place.
Okay. I mean, I will have a particular comment. Obviously, as I always prefer to hear what everybody else says, because you can save me my breath something later, because you are ahead of me. So if we can go round and have thoughts from people, and to be honest, we might as well just start as normal. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I can understand why islanders want to engage with this, because you look at our community and you look at our economy and our jobs market, and you always think to yourself, better on the mainland. Whether it is or not, I wouldn't be so sure, but that's the impression people get. So if you engage with this sort of inquiry and look at what can be done, what we're doing, I think people would definitely are interested, because they want the island to boom. It's as simple as that, you know, and I would fully support it. Yeah.
Councillor Adams. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, when these consultations are complete, before it's for whatever committee, is it going to be put to the public?
Not at large, no.
Or why not? I think it should, because it's important, and I think it should go to the public.
And that's a decision that the committee could make. The only thing I probably would say to that is everybody has got a slightly different slant on this. So there has to be somebody that's making the decisions at the end of the day, which is obviously the members, on what they think is important. Because as Councillor Julie Jones-Evans said, the conversations that have gone around those key themes were extremely robust, with a number of people trying to obviously get their agenda further up the food chain. So
No doubt they probably are, but I know a lot of people that are against quite a few things on there, which wouldn't agree with some of those. The main one being the net zero argument, because the cost of it to everyone is just escalating.
But
And people have concerns on that.
yeah,
The tangible benefits to the country, when you bear in mind as a nation, we don't contribute 1% of the world's carbon, I would argue that it's insignificant. And I know many people that agree, and I would like to see some cost breakdowns of what these things are costing us as an island. I mean,
any other
example,
response?
on like your business innovation and green technology, is that green technology putting solar farms over our fields? Is that part of one of the things in there? I just think people need to be aware of what's going in there.
I think it's safe to say that, and good point, and I've heard the same arguments. They're not ones I share necessarily, but it is important sometimes to understand that there is a number of different voices. I would be surprised if those voices aren't heard within that type of group, that type of setting. But I think it's worth taking that into account and considering not only those voices, but also what are the messages back? I mean, you know, there can be with my teacher's hat on, I can wear various hats. I've had that discussion with a number of people about what we call green technologies, but basically are just different ways of energy capture. And we've had that discussion in planning where I have pushed very hard for planning to be able to make the priority that solar panels are not just fitted in the simplest places, but actually in the more complex places like car parks, warehouses. And at one stage, it was going to be made virtually compulsory for all new houses to have some type of energy capture. So there are a range of issues around that. And a lot of it is energy security, of course. But I take your point. I think other people may have other comments to make as well. And
it's helpful, Councillor Adams' question about public consultation.
Then fine, please.
That's all right. Yeah, so we did actually have this robust conversation back in sort of October time, didn't we? And I think the conclusion we came to, given the time constraints we have faced, and again we've got more constraints because of the devolution ask, is that because it will go on the forward plan, it will be a committee paper. Then to use that period of it being published as an opportunity for the public to see it and comment. We have comments during that, and comments from the committee as well. If it's scrutiny, or if it's not, then it's just the committee as is, whichever committee will sit under for any more comments and or revisions before it gets passed. I think to have a meaningful consultation, you're going to have at least 6 weeks consultation, and possibly as well. We have done quite a lot of workshops that have been going on in September. Anyway, that's kind of conclusion we came to. Whether that you feel that will be enough or not.
I mean, if I can echo what Councillor Adams was saying, I mean, one of the things which surprises me is that I've never had any idea about this. Now, as somebody who has the background and knowledge for an awful lot of these things, and is something which the committee was pushing, I mean, the business innovation and green technology approach, we've been talking for, I think, 3 or 4 meetings about how that might be developed as part of our policy approach. You know, we are a policy committee as well as scrutiny committee, and we've not been involved in this at all. So I think sometimes when we hear how much work, and it sounds like a really good piece of work, and with these type of people, that's you know, an excellent set of responses, and I accept that it has to be limited, but it might be that perhaps the committee itself might like to specifically talk to the contractors as part of our consideration of it before it goes too much further. I'm just sorry. I mean, as always, recommendations are always better prepared before the meeting. I didn't have this in front of me beforehand, so I wasn't aware of what was being said.
So I think that's a really brilliant suggestion. So maybe once we get to the revised draft, because there's still a lot of work to be done, there could be a session with the committee to get some feedback and have the opportunity to have the robust discussion. So maybe similar to we did the update for Road and the Harbour, maybe have that kind of session like that with the committee and the consultants.
Okay, members, what is your opinion on that? Okay, you'd be obviously keen to be involved in that, wouldn't you, Councillor Adams? Yes.
I think it's a great idea, but
okay.
Not only that, it would inform us more, and we could have that fuller discussion at that point, without a doubt. At the moment, this looks great. But I haven't got
action of it, yeah.
background to it, so to have that background as well, absolutely.
We need those action points and everything else. And just to come back on the green technology, it's not about putting technology on our land, for instance, you know, for energy. It's actually
I appreciate that. I was just stating it as a point of contact.
Yeah, no, it's probably more about actually manufacturing any, you know, technology that could go well worldwide, as we know that we've got the skills here to be able to do that. It's probably more it comes from rather than manufacture on the boot, on the.
Okay, so let's give real
projects.
examples. Green technology on the island. We had Horsebridge Hill recently where we had that demo of what's going on there, basically modular housing, and I know that that's something that people have talked about at length. But there specifically is a manufacturer on the island, which happens to be in my ward, of course, so I won't mention the name. But there is also a similar type of collaboration between Sydenham's and a company which basically uses hemp as an insulation material, and they've been doing some work down in the southwest. So we basically have two possibilities on the island already for modular housing. Now that type of manufacturing on the island, which also brings in the skilled trades which we need, gives us can give us a base. Now, that's not trying to set down anything that the strategy might talk about, but it is worth already seeing that there are organisations on the island, there are companies on the island that are already involved in good manufacturing jobs.
And Chair, the hemp company are members of Chambers of Commerce. The Chambers of Commerce have had their own individual session with the consultants, as well as part of the Economic Development Board. So those there has been a route to talk to the Chamber, and as many of those businesses are members of the Chamber, and the FSB has been there as well. But
okay, and finally, sorry, Councillor Quirk, would you want to add anything at this stage?
I think this committee is coming to an end and is passing the baton on. And this needs to be picked up by Policy, Resources and Finance Committee. And maybe we should be making a recommendation that this is on their first agenda.
If I think that's a reasonable suggestion. I mean, if the strategy is going to be released in this interregnum, between King Philip and whoever the next king is,
and I think it should be. I personally think it should be released as a draft strategy, and the new system should be pushing it out rather than it being the plain plus.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the active suggestion we've got at the moment, which I think we've all agreed, is that we will have a meeting as a committee with the contractors. So let's leave it at that for that stage, and then obviously the administration will have, because you're here right up until the deaths, because you're needed.
the work needs doing. We'll find a way to do the work. You know, if it needs passing as a strategy, we'll find a way, won't we? If it's if we've got space and time, then obviously the new committee can pick it up whenever their first meeting is. It's going to seem like we could be busy June, doesn't it, by the sounds of it? So.
Sorry.
I know you've been talking to the Chamber of Commerce as well. Of the ones I've listed here, there's only one manufacturer. Quite a few service companies. A couple of the companies are part of the problem, not the solution. Did you get positive input in terms of manufacturing type?
Yeah,
it would be good to see Wight shipyards there, or somewhere like the people who are at the cutting edge of their particular niche in the marketplace, talking about what they need to grow. They have quite good aspirations.
They're only, that's not the complete list. They're just representative of some of the companies that we spoke to. So yeah, there have been other people that have bought in and been part of those stakeholder groups. We can show you that when we do the presentation.
Well, shall we move on, gentlemen? Unless anybody has any additional questions on this. Sorry, you specifically. Yeah. I apologise, Councillor Besson, please.
Quickly, considering the financial constraints on the Isle of Wight Council at present, you did mention that proceeds left from the old EP funding. Are you confident, and is there enough or sufficient funding to see this project right the way through to the end?
Well, the actual strategy, you mean?
There is. as long as we don't do too much more consultation, because they're already saying to us, if you want to consult everybody, then you're going to have to pay for it.
That's why I asked that question.
That's a very good question.
Is why I sort of suggested that we use that kind of paper being published as a.
But to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we do consult everybody, but what I am suggesting is that when the draft is fully formed, before it's put into policy, I just think public needs to be aware of what's in it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. But we'll go on the forward plan.
Councillor Quirk.
Just a quick one. Have we had or can we get any benefit from the Solent Freeport?
I know what, sorry.
Solent Freeport. 1991, 2021, Solent Freeport was created and gives benefits in terms of relaxation on some of national insurance, for instance. I don't know it applies to specific areas. It certainly applies to Southampton docks. It applies to the airport on the mainland. I don't know whether we've got any benefit on the island.
Yeah, I think if you recall, we had Anne-Marie Mountfield from the LEP came and talked to us in 2022, I think it was. Did a whole section on the Freeport. So it might be worth us getting the minutes from that, maybe refreshing. But the basis of it is we don't have large enough sites to actually have on the island physically enough sites to be able to have all those benefits you talk about. Because it's very strict, the way it's set out, the Freeport policy. The way that we can benefit really is probably more the supply chain of things. So, but we don't have a large enough size. We tried to put Nicholson Road in, and it wasn't large enough. So, but it might be worthwhile refreshing ourselves because Anne-Marie came over and she spoke at length.
It's just if there is opportunities in the supply chain. Been open up.
Well, and this is why
happening to make.
Yeah, and this is why I mean, in a strong theme that's come out of in the draft is talking about our partnership working, our regional working. And this is perfect, isn't it? Southampton, Portsmouth, with the majority of the Solent Freeport being in there on their land, as it were. So we have got good opportunities there and good communications with the you work with the economic development team, don't you, quite closely? So I think the answer is yes, Councillor Quirk.
That's helpful. Sorry, was there some suggestion that James might have additional information for us?
Well, just only because we covered it in the IPS hearings over the last 2 weeks. So, so from a Freeport perspective, there are obviously planning and tax breaks that you can get from certain sites, but all of those sites are on the mainland. So there's some in Southampton as one I know very well, Dunsbury Park in Havant, which is owned by Portsmouth City Council, and another as well. We don't have any on the island, as Councillor James Evans said. So again, we were kind of asked by the inspectors, what are the Freeport benefits to the island? And it's kind of almost impossible to say at the moment, because even those sites are really early days in terms of some of the businesses maybe going forward on those benefiting from those tax breaks and those kind of looser planning regulations. But
there are downsides to a Freeport as well, and the economic benefits are challenging at times.
Absolutely.
Anyway, no, I mean, thank you for that, Councillor Quirk. I think everybody's had.
Sorry, I'd like to
Please do.
ask one more question. James, what's the criteria for these sites, for these Freeport sites? I mean, why doesn't Nicholson Road qualify?
Simple answer is I don't know. I think it does come down to size, as Councillor James Evans says as well, and the proximity probably to the ports. Obviously, we're one trip away from those key ports, aren't we? So
I can give you a bit more at length outside the room about Freeport. But yeah, I mean that was never a surprise. Okay, if we move on then, the glasses on again. I think that we've got a recommendation coming out of this economic development thing, which is we've talked about, which is down as we will have a separate meeting with the contractor. Okay, good. Then if we can move on to the Isle of Wight local nature recovery strategy. I've got a few documents here if anybody's really desperate to go through some of it. It is fabulous. I can't put it no other way. It is one of the most impressive documents that I've seen in a long time, and having collated the skills one from Hampshire, I think it's only fair to recognise when documents are really, really good. There are additional points to consider, but I wanted to make sure again that the committee have a chance to talk about that. Again, can I go around and we'll just take it as a free for all? Does anybody have any points or questions which they wish to raise? Councillor Ward.
But mine's only a general comment, Chairman. We come up with all these wonderful nature policies and so on and so forth. But I get the impression that that is the priority and people come second. You know, if you want to build something, or you can't do that because of, you know, the bugs that are on that bit of grass and so on and so forth. I just think we need to apply common sense, really, at things. That's it. That's all I've got to say.
I won't say anything at the moment. Does any have a, sorry, Councillor Adams, do you have anything to add to this?
Thank you.
Ooh, okay, Councillor Beston.
I was going to make a comment on the area that it covered. So it's around about 5,000 hectares, which is what, over 12,000 acres, isn't it? I've read it and I've been online to read parts of it as well, and it is impressive, and it's a huge chunk of work. But to cover the mapping of that particular area, of this particular area of over 12,000 acres, to recognize and to identify biodiversity and etc. How was that work undertaken? I mean, what resource was available? It's manpower. It must be boots on the ground to cover that. I mean,
I can help with that. I can help with that because one of the key things is that this builds on an enormous database of information, which actually has been building up on the island since the 19th century.
So historic data, yeah.
There's a lot of historic data and a lot of individual passionate people going out boots on the ground. I met a couple of bird counters yesterday, one of the chief ones on the island, looking for particular birds, and they mentioned birds I've never even heard of, but there again I know very little about avian biology at all. But there is a lot of, if you look at some of the documentation, if you actually printed out everything that was available, it would make the school place plan look positively easy. There's thousands of pages of information, and there's quite a range of people who are engaged in this. So, for instance, the National Landscapes, the OMB, the records that they've got, and if only one thing, and it's worth mentioning because I always mention it, ancient woodlands. We did a survey about 12 or 14 years ago that followed on from one which had been done previously. I'm trying to get another one done. And what we're looking at is smaller and smaller pockets. So, for instance, the last one was a hectare in size. Now we're looking at, well, there are other bits of ancient woodland. Ancient woodland is just basically stuff which has been around since 1600. In some cases, it's been around for thousands of years, but that's a different issue. If we look at it in smaller bits, then we can find really, really rich biodiverse areas. And dealing with what Councillor Wall was saying, what you're doing is, what are the really critical areas of ancient landscapes which we have to protect? And so you've got sites of scientific sinks, you've got triple SIs, you've got Ramsars, there are an immense range of information which is available from a range of government and local organisations. And so it gives you a very distinct area of what can be done. And one of the nice things which I'm seeing coming out of our planning department, and I'm going to congratulate them because they need it every now and again, perhaps not as often as they'd like, but sometimes, is the biodiversity net gain, which is basically how do you improve biodiversity within developments? And it actually can be relatively simple, can be quite complex at times. But some of the work that they've done to do the measurement of that, how do you actually make those things happen? So what we're looking at really is, and all of us, nearly all of us, we'll leave Councillor Lever to one side, are old enough to remember you know, the 70s and the type of landscapes and the type of wildlife that we had then. In South London, we had floods, we had flocks of sparrows. I've scarcely seen them on the Isle of Wight. They disappeared from London years ago. And that is just one example. There are many, many others. So we are going through a real crisis of biodiversity, and that has real effects. That has real negative effects. So if there is some way that this type of strategy can actually make something happen, then it's worth pursuing. Now, that's not me. I'm not trying to be on a soapbox. I'm just simply saying there are real practical benefits for our economy of being a place where we actually do care and improve our landscape. I wasn't going to say too much, so I'll shut up now. Councillor Beston, please.
Get that, absolutely get it. And as I understand, this strategy is going to become integrated within the island planning strategy. So, latching on to what Councillor Ward had said, and given our housing targets, whatever be, kind, I wouldn't want to see strategy of this kind as a prevention or a blocker with regards to planning. So there has to be a balance. There has to be some sense in all of this.
I think James Brewer has some comment that he can make to this.
Yeah, happy to pick up that, and I think it also talks to the point that Councillor Ward raised as well. And I think when DEFRA kind of tasked the responsible authorities across the country with preparing the LRSs, it's very clear in the guidance that they have to work alongside local plans and not in conflict with them. So I guess in some ways wearing lots of hats as a planning policy manager can sometimes have its challenges, but also sometimes brings its opportunities. And so having the LRS and the IPS in the same place as a council has been a real positive, because we've been able to effectively make sure they're talking to each other all the way through. So the government recently released, I think it's referenced in the report, a kind of some specific guidance on how LRSs and plans work together. We've already got a policy in the IPS around making sure that development takes account of the LRS. So again, we're kind of ahead of a game in that perspective. So absolutely, it cannot be used as a blocker for development. It's got to work alongside it, and actually it provides development with a really positive opportunity of doing the right thing for nature, which is what this is fundamentally about.
That's a quote, please.
I shared that concern. I expressed those concerns in the consultation, and actually ended up having a fairly long conversation with one of the authors. So on the telephone. So and I was reassured that this isn't going to be, shouldn't be used as a way of sort of blocking reasonable planning application in urban areas. It may well be that you don't want to damage sites in rural areas. You certainly don't want to damage SSSIs, but that it's not going to be used just as a blanket block to say we can't do anything, and that's important.
Councillor Lever.
I wasn't going to say anything,
No,
but
go on.
bit tongue in cheek, but I think this is the most I've heard people wanting to protect development, the conversation of wanting to protect development that I've had in the 4 years I've been on this council. I found it quite amusing. Yeah, the whole point of this is not to frustrate progress of man, of humans, right? It's to readdress balance that Councillor Stewart mentioned earlier, the fact that a load of these things, the natural environment has been damaged over years, and it's just trying to readdress that balance. And it doesn't just benefit animals and all this hippie, airy-fairy stuff, it benefits us as human beings. In the strategy we just looked at, much of that was what attracts people to Isle of Wight. I wasn't born here, I moved here just over 10 years ago, and I love it here. And the part of the reason I love it here is because of the natural beauty of this island and the aspects around that. So, and also it's looking at, it's not just about putting things in to make sure this can't happen or this can't happen. Like just on the website am I on? Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust talks about it's about investment and funding for not just like farming, stuff that is critical to the Isle of Wight as well. Farming, land management. We were just talking about flooding before. All of the, I'm just trying to get across that it's not just these airy, very hippie subjects. It's very real, fundamental funding issues that the Isle of Wight can utilise to make sure that we have a more sustainable future on the Isle of Wight. So, sorry, that is my. Yeah.
Quieter than mine. Well done. It's worth mentioning that certainly in a rural community like mine, because I have got a very large rural ward, is I recently attended the farming conference, and it was heartening to see how far they understood that they could be more successful as farmers by actually adopting some of these processes, and also, of course, government funding will help some of these processes. And it helps with, water retention on the land, soil retention within the farming areas themselves. So when you actually look at the number of people this study has talked to, and obviously in depth in many cases, it does really offer a nice picture for the Isle of Wight, where most of the communities are involved. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? One of the things that I sometimes see is that it's difficult to see where we go from here in terms of engagement with the wider community, and more especially with the younger generation. Because first of all, the island gives them reasons to be here by its beauty and its aspect and everything else. But actually, unless they are engaged with this, they're not even going to know about it. So is there anything within this that actually will bring that community engagement and young people engagement into it?
Thank you, Chair. And I think, it's been one of the most kind of almost the two communities through the preparation of this document, and I'll come on to a little bit more detail, that we've thought were absolutely vital with the farming community and young people, because they're potentially two of the communities that can be affected most by this when you're thinking around, use of land and then what happens in kind of 20, 30, 40 years. So Ian and the team at ARC did a lot of engagement with trying to go to schools and universities and that to try and get that engagement, and because it was so important. So I think from a point of looking ahead and thinking around how this gets delivered, I think that's an absolutely key focus to continue, both the farming community and young people as well, because they're effectively going to be the ones who deliver this in the future. So absolutely, it's been picked up through the strategy, and I think will form a key part of delivery post strategy as well. And I think some good news to share with the committee is that DEFRA have confirmed there will be funding coming to responsible authorities for LNRS delivery. We don't quite know how much or when, but we're expecting it before potentially the end of this financial year. So that's a really positive, because one of the things as RAs we've been kind of championing at DEFRA is it's all very well giving us the money to do it, but if you don't give us any money to deliver it, then what's the point in the first place? But so that money is coming, which is fantastic news. It's a real positive. And I do want to just mention Ian and the team at ARC who we commissioned to do this piece of work, that they've done a stunning job. And I think, Councillor Stewart's praise of it is worthy. We went to the DEFRA panel just before Christmas with our draft NRS. We were one of, I think we're the only one in the country so far who's come through that panel process with no recommended changes to the draft, and they consider it an exemplar for the country. And I think we're off to present to the kind of LNRS of all the responsible authorities at the end of this month, doing a QA and a presentation on the Isle of Wight journey and how we've got to here so far. So I think we really should celebrate that, because it is a fantastic achievement, and it's going to do fantastic things for the island and nature on the island. So I just want to.
So can I ask because about the link to the economic strategy, because one of the key things, and it mentions the figure here, and actually I think it's too small, about the number of people involved in sort of the natural landscape and farming and the like, and they mentioned a figure of about 1,000 people employed. It's actually definitely more than that. You simply just need to understand some of the sort of the different trades that feed into agriculture and the like, and to the various sort of nature recoveries and things. I mean, the number of people employed by the National Trust, for instance. So how have we got direct links through to the economic strategy at this stage?
I think the first point is that the involvement of the farming community in this process to date has been really good and really positive. And some of those funding mechanisms that I think Councillor Lever mentioned before he left as well, around the LRS is around opening up some of those access to funding streams. So the government and DEFRA are fully expecting that if you're a farmer and you're using your land in a different way, but that way aligns with what's in the LRS, and if you're in a competition with someone else bidding for a funding pot and they're not, you'll win because you're doing what the LRS says you should do. So again, there's a real positive economic benefit to it. Obviously, we'll continue to touch base with the economic strategy and how that net zero environment kind of pod of work that they're doing then feeds into the LRS. Got the climate environment strategy as well, the IPS, that everything's got to talk to each other and make sure that they're kind of going after the same thing. But I think from an economic perspective, there are real benefits that the LRS can bring to the island, and so far the stakeholders involved in the process have been embracing that.
Okay. Any additional thoughts from? Yes, Councillor. Excellent.
Well, I may be straying a little bit, but something that you said, points regarding the sparrows. I've noticed that when I've been coming to the island there for about 55 years. I wasn't born here, but I've been coming here for 55 years. Maybe 60. But I noticed when I was a young lad, I used to notice in the house where I stayed, the amount of bees in the garden. The neighbourhoods and chickens. I've always been a keen fisherman. I used to go bait digging. He used to let me keep ragworm and that in his shed, give me a wet sack and say, do this, nipper, and this makes them last. Anyway, I just noticed there was like, I'm not kidding you, James, there were thousands of bees. They was in every flower. Today, I rarely see them. And I actually remarked on this to my missus last year. I said, like, there's no bees. But not only are there no bees, Nick, there's no flies. After living in France for a few years, when we lived in France and we was rural, in the spring, this time of year, as soon as it started warming up, James, you could hear the flies. That sort of buzz in sequence, you could hear them all through the day. I'm not one for fly sprays. I used to use fly papers, but they would be covered. Every day they was covered. I'd be taking them down. Like, do we know why have we got this lack of insects? And I mean, is it just insecticides? Is that anything that can be addressed in this strategy?
It's fundamentally
Because that concerns me that, you know.
It's absolutely one of the things this strategy is trying to address is that decline in biodiversity, whether that's insects, whether that's other species, whether that's plants, whether all those different kind of things. That's what this is trying to do, to reverse that decline, really. And I think the analogy you use is, when you think about when's the last time you did your windscreen for the flies in the summer? You used to do it all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
It's
Because
that-
when I
that's the-
come,
you know,
I'm
that-
working in Kent and come back, there's hardly any flies on the car.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And that, you know, one of the purposes of the document is to identify where those declines are and how we can effectively reverse them. And so it looks at mapping the right thing coming forward in the right place. As much as we talk about housing and commercial development, the right development in the right place, it's the same for nature. It's the right type of habitat in the right place to allow those species to come back. And that's what this is about.
Can I just, I was reading something quite the other day about the lack of bees. And this seems to be a national problem. We may
Oh,
not have
it is,
a
it is, no, it's,
So, what do you reckon? I know you're not a bee person or what. But, the policy should help, but what is causing it?
Good question. I don't know the answer, but I suspect it's probably a decline in general types of kind of flowers and habitats. You know, that's the key thing. And different farming practices and all that kind of stuff. So there's probably lots of contributing factors to it, but what this can do is at least get the kind of habitat bit right.
Also the use of glyphosate.
yeah, which we had that chat about, didn't we, with Island Roads, yeah.
Yeah. I won't go into the science of that. I did look into it at one stage because. Okay, well, gentlemen, actually, that's been really helpful. I think it's important that these type of strategies come in front of people like us who, you know, come from a variety of backgrounds and have different approaches to these things. We've got a list of questions here. I have no intention of going through any of the other questions unless somebody else wants to raise anything else at this stage. What I would suggest that we put forward a recommendation and we wholeheartedly support this, and that we would like to recommend that the Cabinet take it forward as rapidly as possible. Can I have a seconder to that? Thank you, Councillor Ward. And are we all in agreement to that? Thank you. Yes, unanimous. Okay. I seem to be running out of things to talk about. How good can that be? We have members' questions time. Do the members here have any questions which they wish to raise? Councillor Ward.
Chairman, firstly, I'll apologise to you and the committee. This is not a question. This is your request. You all know Sandown and its reputation and its derelict hotels. And for years, the council has been battling through the courts, trying to get Section 215s accepted and carried out and so on and so forth. Well, we've got to the stage now where the two main ones, the Ocean Hotel and the Esplanade, which is next to it, have viable Section 215s, okay, which should expire and mid-year. But what I've been thinking about is then, so what? Even if they comply with the Section 215, we've still got derelict hands on our hands. You know, that's not going to change. And I can tell you, the residents think we're useless. We never do anything. You know? I can try and tell them we're working on it all the time in one way or another. But we have a policy that prevents, that defends, if I put it a different way, defends seafront hotels. Okay, well, that means you can't do anything with them. You know, you've got a seafront hotel, that's derelict, end of story. So what do we do? And I did discuss this with Ollie, and he invited me along to the inspection, the island planning inspection. He said, come along, we're actually going to discuss tourist accommodation. And I went along, and you know, the large seafront hotels are in decline. There is no business, so you know, we've got to bite the bullet. I discussed this with Ollie, as I said, and he expected me to come along, and I was incredibly pleased to see that there were 3 people there giving evidence. I don't know who they were. I didn't bribe them. Okay, but they all supported a review of the policy. Okay, now a review is a review. I know James is going to get stuck with it, but I can't expect him to tell me what the review is going to reveal. But what I want to ask the committee, would you support a request to virtually all our people sitting there, all our officers, saying, please review this policy as soon as possible? That's what I'm after. Good.
James, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, yeah, firstly, thank you for coming along, Councillor Ward. It was good to see you at the examination hearings and see how it goes on. I think we have a difference between the current policy in the core strategy and what we're looking to take through in the island planning strategy. And the IPS, whilst it does recognise those core tourist accommodation areas in Sandown and Shanklin, it does provide a bit more flexibility for different things to happen in those areas if sites are not being used. And I think that's the fundamental point, which is what you're making, is that, you know, we all know the tourist accommodation kind of sector has changed in those particular areas, and the policies we've written in the IPS will hopefully address that. So if a site is derelict and vacant and there is an alternative use, there is a policy framework for it to come forward for something different. And I think that's that's the way we're looking to take it. So I'd say I would probably suggest hold fire and see what the IPS examination inspectors say, and then depending on what they say, you'll either be very happy or we might have to go back to the
I did send Ollie a paragraph that I wanted to basically put in a report, and he came back with a very guarded answer saying you didn't say anything that was incorrect. So if we could sort of formalise that request, I'll be grateful.
Right, okay, so the request is that we ask the council to consider the policy and ensure that within the island planning strategy there is a recognition that seafront hotels have to be considered.
Sorry, isn't James going to take that forward? then?
Oh, I was also, yeah, you did.
Just say, obviously, you can't recommend any changes to the IPS because that's just been through its IPS. What I was suggesting was if perhaps the committee want to hold fire until the inspectors have issued their report on the IPS. Because obviously if they support the approach that Councillor Ward saw through the hearings, then the policy will do what you want it to do. And I think that's the, obviously if it doesn't, then
I would hate for it to disappear when we change over systems and it disappears into the ether.
Then we'll simply make a recommendation that the committee, if everybody is happy, that the committee is aware of this particular problem and would like the council to keep it in mind, especially in light of the forthcoming island plan strategy.
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Does anybody else? Sorry, let's go round. Councillor Adams, do you have any questions?
Where we going now?
We're members' questions. No, okay, soon.
No,
Sorry, I can answer
Finish
it
that.
soon. Councillor Beckton.
No, I'm good. Just to say, thanks to you, Nick, for chairing this last these meetings on the future scrutiny. It's been enjoyable and hopefully we engage in some form of committee soon post-May.
Can I second that as a formal resolution to?
Yes.
In it.
As chair, I would ask everybody who would support that, because I can't say anything about it. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and
Got my question.
Councillor Quirk, please. Dan, can I ask about the military road first?
How we go home now?
Only got 20 minutes. No, I have no questions. I would like to thank everybody on the committee. This is the last policy and scrutiny committee for Neighbourhoods and Regeneration. I have been privileged to be supported by some very helpful people on the committee over the last 2 years. I hope that I will be able to work with all of you when we go to committee system. And I would like to call the meeting to a close at whatever. 7:25. I apologise, that's one of our shorter meetings. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming along.